what we need to begin to talk about is this idea of the savage and the natives in the New World and these encounters. And so remember, it wasn't just Columbus. It was Spanish merchants that came into Mexico and the galleon ships that were coming through by way of the Philippines that were establishing themselves in the Americas with the intent, with the purpose of getting rich. But when you get rich, you have to do it usually at the expense of a population or what you either take it or you receive it from someone. And so this story of what we call, and it's important if you want to write this down, this idea of colonialism. Let's go ahead and can anyone tell me what colonialism is?
I like that word.
Yes, it's also associated with this idea of imperialism. Does anyone tell me what that is? No, anyone seen these before? Anyone know? Yes.
Imperialism is like kingdoms, or it's just kind of the way the quote government works, and colonialism is like the different colonies. I'm just going off of the words.
No, that's okay. You're on the right track. You're in there. Joseph, you want to add?
So like Madeline said, imperialism is the government where they tried expanding territory by taking it over, and colonialism with the colonies were the new lands of the imperial governments.
Right. So it's the idea of imperialism, this need to become a large and powerful empire that leads to colonialism, in which we need to expand. We need to take over lands. And so that's what happened to the Americas. They basically became a victim of this idea of colonialism. Okay? And so what we need to understand is the Native Americans actually, again, were civilized and lived very well. They had an abundance of resources. They were very, very proficient, and they were expert farmers, and they had a great agricultural community. Again, squash, beans, corn. All right. And so they actually also, and we talk about civilizations, they started to shift from nomadic hunting to actually having permanent villages and cities. So it's this misconception that they were this savage group of people that would just move around like ancient man. They actually were quite civilized by the time there was European contact. And when I ask you to take notes, again, you don't need to take necessarily every single word down. If there's certain key topics you want to write from these, you want to do that. So when we talked about Native Americans had an abundant supply of meat, and they had advanced agriculture with permanent villages and large cities. If that's all you want to write, that's fine. It's just something to remind you of what we're talking about. Okay. Interestingly enough, we always talk about Native Americans, we talk about America, but I think it's important at this time to take into consideration that Native Americans and their culture was very similar to what was going on in Mexico with the Aztecs. And so when we talk about colonial contact, colonialism, we have to include this population. They were settled in the what is now Mexico City and many of the surrounding areas. They actually had one of the larger empires in the Americas. And they were highly organized social. They had a highly organized social and political structure. So they actually had not necessarily what we would consider a government, but they had a governance, which is a way of ruling the masses. Okay. they were very combative. They had to fight for their lands and whatnot, so they did have armies at their disposal. And we see that when Cortez and the Spanish came to Mexico City to overtake it, it was actually quite a fierce battle. And so then we have the woodland cultures of the East and the Atlantic coast. They lived in smaller groups. Again, agriculture supplemented with hunting. And so these were likely the first tribes on this Atlantic coast to encounter Europeans with Columbus. So again, this is just a quick map to show you all the different tribes that were within the Americas here. And again, we kind of count the northern Mexican areas. Right below here is where the Aztecs, and below that where the Mayans were located. But we're really talking about a large group of people, a large indigenous population that expanded from Canada all the way down into Mexico. So this is really, when we talk about Native American cultures, we really have to include all of these. So it's a lot. I mean, we're talking about a vast number. Okay, in the 1600s. All right. Again, we had this huge influx. We had this huge movement of European settlers into America. And it greatly changed native cultures. Again, the rate of change varied from place to place. There were certain areas of the Americas that weren't immediately taken over or occupied by Europeans. So some of the native traditions stayed in place for a while, but others completely changed to the point where many of them were completely lost. So you have to say, well, what now? What happens when a group is stripped of their culture? And so there was a lot of diversity within Native Americans, so there was a lot of different groups with a lot of different languages and whatnot. And things changed. Before, you lived in an area and you were connected to the people in that tribe, and that's how you distinguished yourself, but that wasn't the case anymore. So, prior to European contact, it was this kind of communal society where they had formations of, diplomacy, trade. And again, there was war, but it was really about these relationships between tribes and how maybe they didn't get along or they were having disputes. So it was a very complex and, again, diverse group of people. And so how does that change when Europeans come in and really dictate a new way of life? All right, I'm going to go ahead and pass through this. It's just specific areas. Okay, so here we get to European contact, and we were talking about Columbus, good guy or bad guy. Well, whether he intended to, which there's no indication he intended to. It seems like one of the unexpected consequences of European contact is that they were going to bring diseases that the Native Americans did not have a immunoresistance to. So their bodies could not fight them off, or even they didn't stand a chance for some of these. And three of the main diseases that were brought through were smallpox, measles, and influenza. And some of these diseases had a mortality rate of 95%, meaning only some of the populations, only 5% were able to survive. So it's a huge, huge number of fatalities, of deaths. Sorry, what? What was that?
I was just trying to get down to the measles.
Oh, yeah.
Measles.
What? It's measles. Oh.
Measles.
I pronounced them.
It's okay, Drew.
Yes.
Didn't they like, I remember, I think Liz said this like yesterday or something during practice or something. How the Americans, whatever, they like disease a blanket with like smallpox and then they gave it to the Indians.
Right. So there were certain, and this is later on. This is after when the Americas are settled in and they're starting the manifest destiny, which is moving west because they said God willed it. As they were moving west and settling in the west, there were certain Native American populations that they had to relocate or clear out. You've probably heard of the Trail of Tears, that kind of movement. Well, there were certain times when they needed to get rid of populations where they would trick them by offering them blankets for the winter, and the blankets were infected with smallpox and measles. Yeah.
Amy said that they put it in like their bread too.
Yeah, the Indians put syphilis, like their blood into their bread.
Ooh,
But
I
they're
like
like,
the
put the
sound of
like
that.
blood or something.
Well, see, yeah, syphilis would be a bad idea because it usually takes years to die from that. So, smallpox was definitely the better way. So, yeah. So just so you know, that is true. I don't know about the bread, but definitely the blankets.
Keystone.
Yeah.
I know. So that's why it doesn't make any sense.
So okay. Independent adventurers, as we would call them, commissioned by the Spanish crown to subdue the new lands. They were constantly coming to different areas of the Americas, right? So we had major Caribbean island decimation. So in the Caribbean, the disease hit particularly hard because you couldn't escape it. You were on an island. 1521, Cortez doesn't wait for the disease, he just decides to overtake and destroy the Aztec Empire. And he does so in a matter of, I think it was a 6-day campaign. Alright, we have De Soto who explores the southeast, and Coronado who explores the southwest. And so all these different contacts led to the introduction of disease, also led to the introduction of European ways of life, which conflicted with Native American ways of life. Yes?
Could you go a little bit more into the Caribbean islands being decimated? I don't really know that part of history very well.
Well, basically the Caribbean islands became a perfect hub for trade and almost an outpost. So whereas a lot of these subsequent or even previous kind of excursions were let's explore, let's see what's there, let's travel around, the Caribbean became more of an outpost. So there was permanent settling there, first and foremost. And so when you do that, there's pretty much a guarantee that those infections and diseases are going to be introduced, that ways of life are going to change, that there's going to be land grabs, and you know, the Caribbean's being the small, isolated area it is. If you have people coming to settle, to trade, and to become rich, they're going to need the land, they're going to want the land, they're going to have supposedly the money to do so. So we see this eradication that occurs, both from disease but also from greed. And so it became this unique place, and we find later that the Caribbean ends up being that perfect outpost as well for the slave trade. And so historically it just becomes this place where it's so valuable that it almost becomes impossible to allow native populations there to exist.
Okay.
Right? Okay. So we're almost to the end. So this is just a quick map of the different voyages, where they went. You can see that many of them came to the east and southern coast, but we also have some that came around and worked their way to the west. And so it was something that affected the entire area of North America. Okay, and then again, we talked about this. Once you settle, you need supplies. You need to plunder, right? And so once they started to settle, what the Spanish crown started to do, what the king and queen of Spain began to do, is they started to reward these people with large land grants. They would just say, hey, guess what? We're going to give you Florida. It's like, okay, it wasn't yours to give away, but sure. And so the Indian inhabitants provided labor or tribute. They did whatever they could to try and be useful. But again, it just didn't work out as well as they thought it would. Again, the Catholic Church also had specific duties as far as conversion. And they tried to protect the Native Americans' rights, but unfortunately, they really didn't have any power. They were sent over there to make them westernized, to make them into European, Catholic, Christian, God-fearing people. Okay, by 1650, 500,000 Spaniards were in the New World. A lot of them decided to have children with Native American women. And so we had a huge population of mixed Spanish and Native American children. Mestizos, right, which is literally mixed, means mixed. Okay, and I promise I will stop talking to you very shortly. What we'll do, and so what I want to do is just show you a couple of images. These are different depictions of what was going on. So here we have an outpost, a European outpost that's being attacked by the natives, and the way in which the conquistadors, you can see them with their helmets, defended. This is one where they supposedly are defending themselves and they're slaughtering the naked Indians. And so notice they're depicted as these kind of naked people. Yes, Jim?
Can you put this on the headline?
I will. All right. I'm actually going to put this lecture on Headline, and so this will just be kind of our foundation.
Is
All right.
recording? Oh,
Yeah.
where? At the bottom.
And so, also, the conversion aspect. There are accounts of torture to get Native Americans to convert to Christianity.
Oh my God.
And so they needed to be indoctrinated and westernized. They needed to be told that they needed God. This is a more contemporary depiction of Native Americans attacking a farm. And so again, there are the depiction of the Native American is just kind of sneaking around, bringing down a house, outnumbering whoever lives here. This is kind of beginning to tell the story of how we think about Native Americans and who they were and what they were about. More contemporary depiction of the Aztecs fighting the conquistadors. This is more stylized. And if you notice, this is what's happening now. Now in art, what we see is this revisionist of history, a retelling of history, right? And so this is from a Mexican-American artist from, I believe, the early 2000s, in which he depicts this very kind of powerful and colorful Aztec warrior who's actually killing the conquistador, but also being killed. So it's this mutual destruction. But it's very different from some of the other depictions we see. All right. And so I will